A recent news story. The Minister of Energy is asking us not to wash our clothes in the evening because it's not good for the energy system. Friends, it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon when solar energy enters the grid. It's the right time to start the washing machine. Here's another recent news story. It seems that prosumers will be required by the state to install batteries. So if you have a solar panel and produce excess energy, you won't be able to inject it into the power grid unless you have batteries. What's with this law? Where does the problem come from? And how is it connected to washing machines? Thinking of installing solar panels and becoming a prosumer? Here are the basic things you need to know. Dear friends, you already know that I installed my solar panel in the countryside. I even started injecting energy into the grid. It's called being a prosumer. That means I give from my surplus. But it's not as simple as it might seem. To understand this, let's go back a bit to the laws of physics. Energy is produced at the hydroelectric plant, let's say. Then the high and low voltage networks bring it to the consumer. I put bring in quotation marks because energy doesn't travel through cables, as one might think, but through the air. I learned this from Richard Feynman. However, nothing in the laws of physics prevents energy from flowing in the opposite direction using the same electricity networks. From the consumer who has solar panels and therefore produces energy, now called a prosumer, to other consumers on the same electrical grid. Nothing except practical considerations. The fact is, if the electrical grid isn't built for this from the start, the neighbor's light bulbs start burning out and the fuses blow. Why? Here's what happens in a super simplified electrical diagram where we have direct current and consumers placed one after another on a transmission line. In addition, we consider them placed one after another on a transmission line. U0 is considered constant. They would have had the same voltage. Look at what actually happens when we have losses on the transmission line. The electric voltage is lower and lower along the line. The electric voltage gets lower and lower when we reach the last consumer on the line. U0 is greater than U2. Basically, due to voltage drops on different transmission sections, the drop is proportional to the current passing through there. The more current the consumers draw, the more the voltage drops along the network. In practice, the generator voltage U0, which remains constant, is chosen high enough so that even the last user U4 has sufficient voltage. The more current the consumers use, the greater the voltage drop across the transmission sections of the network, and the voltage at the users decreases. In this case, we have U1 prime less than U1, meaning the voltage at high consumption is lower than at low consumption. In this diagram, you can see what happens when the last consumer on the line turns on their solar panels. Here, I modeled the solar panels as a direct current source for simplicity. When the solar panels start generating current, in the morning when the sun comes up, we apply Kirchhoff's laws and see how the current coming from the grid to the consumer decreases a bit compared to what it was before. Basically, the household consumes less electricity from the grid because part of the energy used is provided by the solar panels. If the light on the panels increases as the sun rises in the sky, then the current generated by the solar panels also increases. At some point, this will equal the current consumed by the household itself and a balance is achieved. The consumer no longer draws electricity from the grid because they produce their own energy from the panels. Now it's as if the consumer has disconnected from the grid. That's why the total electricity consumption on the power network is lower. The voltage drops on the network will also be small due to resistive losses. That's why the voltages on the network for the other consumers, meaning U1, U2, U3 and so on, will now be higher. The sum of the voltages on the lines is always the same, given by the U0 source. Here you can see what happens when there is a lot of sunlight. I kept the same internal consumption for the example. Now, the electric current generated by the panels is very high, exceeding the one normally drawn from the grid. Therefore, the direction of the electric current coming from the grid changes in our direct current model. Since the model is direct current and the direction of the voltage remains the same, the power flowing from the grid reverses direction. This means that the entire household becomes a generator of energy for the grid. The current injected by the panels into the grid reaches the neighboring consumers, so the total consumption from the grid is reduced even further. This means that the electric voltage at the consumers upstream on the grid, that is, at our neighbor, will increase even more. That's where the problems start. Well, if it increases too much, their household appliances can get damaged. This is the most important thing to consider when we talk about prosumers. When they pump energy into the grid, the electric voltage increases along the distribution network and can affect other consumers. In practice, if there are many prosumers, they create imbalances in the grid. On that sunny day, when all the solar panels generate a lot of electricity, the electric voltage will increase uncontrollably in the power grid, endangering all other consumers. We call this a grid voltage imbalance. Now we understand, at least from the perspective of solar energy, why the minister says to run the washing machine during the day. By running the washing machine, we will draw more current from the grid and the electric voltage will decrease, which otherwise would have been higher due to the surplus of solar energy. In the end, the energy system remains safe. Essentially, it's a matter of balancing the energy grid. In the evening, we have a problem at the opposite end. Too much energy is consumed and the voltage ends up dropping too much. Now it's better not to use the washing machine because otherwise the electric voltage would drop even more. This is how we understand the effort involved in balancing the electric grid. Essentially, it's an old problem of Romania, which inherited an energy distribution system that is basically one way from the big producers to the consumers. What are you supposed to do with prosumers who now want to pump energy into the grid as well? In developed countries, there are mechanisms that make it easier to maintain balance in the electrical grid. Many countries offer financial benefits. If you consume energy at night when the voltage is higher because there is less consumption, you pay less. Other countries use technical solutions, such as transformers with variable voltage. Of course, you've seen a transformer near high-voltage networks. Its role is to convert the electric voltage from the network, alternating, of course, into low electric voltage, about 230 volts. In transformers with variable electric voltage, this low voltage delivered to consumers can be automatically adjusted, depending on the user's load. If they consume a lot, the electric voltage naturally drops, and then the transformer will raise its secondary voltage. The same thing happens when the consumption decreases. The voltage would naturally increase. The variable voltage transformer measures this and delivers a lower voltage on the secondary side. Such a solution also benefits prosumers. A sunny day arrives and all the prosumers on the line deliver energy. Voltage in the networks rises, and the transformer sees this. Being variable, it will automatically lower its voltage. In Romania, however, such solutions are expensive. To protect the network, a harsh method is applied, disconnecting the prosumer. If the prosumer, by delivering too much energy into the system, causes the voltage to rise in a dangerous way. The idea is as follows. Any solar panel produces direct current voltage. To feed it into the AC grid, an inverter is used. That's why the inverters used by prosumers have a built-in safety system. They monitor the electric voltage. When a lot of energy is fed into the grid and the electric voltage increases, the inverter automatically disconnects from the grid so that the high voltage doesn't cause any damage. Prosumers who have installed a three-phase system have an advantage. They distribute the energy across all three phases of the grid. The energy delivered on a single phase will be lower. Because of this, three-phase systems disconnect from the grid less often, which benefits the prosumers who have them. In addition, when the three-phase inverter is more complex, for example, being built from three separate single-phase inverters, it is possible to deliver energy on those phases of the grid that have a lower voltage. However, there are other solutions as well, such as using batteries. This is easy to understand. If the voltage rises too much when the surplus energy is delivered to the grid and the inverter is disconnected from the grid, it can automatically connect to the batteries and charge them. The energy stored in the batteries is then delivered to the grid at the most suitable time. For example, in the evening when the panels are not charging the battery, when consumption is high and the system needs energy. In fact, with batteries, you can do something even smarter. If you automatically check the weather and see that it will rain tomorrow, it's better not to put the battery energy into the grid, but to keep it for yourself. Use it the next day. Such a smart system is installed, for example, by the company EcoSolaris. At EcoSolaris, they understand the importance of optimizing photovoltaic systems for prosumers, and we know that batteries are essential in this process. The use of batteries in photovoltaic systems brings multiple advantages, including maximizing energy efficiency and reducing dependence on the power grid. By storing the surplus energy produced during the day, batteries allow you to use it at night or on cloudy days, ensuring a continuous power supply. In addition, this solution helps save on energy costs and protects the environment by reducing carbon emissions. Investing in a battery system is a smart choice for a more sustainable and economical future, strengthening energy independence and the efficiency of the entire photovoltaic system. Visit the ecosolaris.ro website now to find out more information. Link in the description. Batteries are good for prosumers and for balancing the energy system. This way, we can understand why the government came up with a new law that required prosumers to install batteries. But of course, this comes with an additional cost for prosumers. The law was hastily discussed on the last day of the parliamentary session. It was not adopted. It was sent back by the president with a few observations. It would require all prosumers who have solar panels with an installed capacity of at least 10.8 kilowatt-hours to install batteries equivalent to 30 or 50% of the system's capacity. The average installed capacity for a household prosumer is somewhere between 5 and 10 kWh, so they would seem to be excluded. On the other hand, there is an additional article in the law that can be interpreted to mean that all prosumers who have more than 3 kW of installed capacity must also install batteries. In this case, the batteries must have a storage capacity of at least 30% of the installed capacity. To give you an idea, for an installed capacity of 6 kWh, this would mean a battery storage capacity of 2.5 kWh. The costs for these batteries start at €250 per kWh, to which you have to add the control system and even the replacement of the system's inverter. It seems that the law would actually create a problem for prosumers who installed their solar panels through the Casa Verde program. According to the contracts, they are not allowed to modify anything in the installation for several years. If their inverter does not have the capacity to connect to batteries, which happens in many cases, they cannot replace the old inverter with a new one. That would violate the contract. What they can do is install the new inverter alongside the old one. From what I read in the draft law, the affected prosumers should also install batteries by the year 2027. Otherwise, they will no longer have the right to feed energy into the national grid. The question remains, would this law be a good thing or a bad thing? Personally, I believe the government's message is that prosumers are the ones who should contribute financially to balancing the grid, at least for the part they are responsible for. Of course, the issue is a double-edged sword. The imbalance of the energy grid is much deeper, going beyond the issue of prosumers. This can be seen these days in the high cost of electricity, which comes from large daily fluctuations in energy transactions precisely because of this imbalance. However, there are also other mechanisms for regulating the grid, such as encouraging consumption at appropriate times or building a balanced grid from the start with all its components. Hydro, nuclear, wind, and so on. If prosumers will have to pay for the batteries out of their own pockets, we might end up with the opposite effect. Due to high costs, fewer and fewer solar panel owners will want to become prosumers. As I said, the president has sent the law back to Parliament. In the request for re-examination, the president emphasized that implementing this obligation would involve considerable costs for prosumers, and it could discourage investments in photovoltaic panels. And with that, we've reached the end for today. Until next time, please subscribe if you haven't already by clicking this subscribe button right now. I want to thank those who support us on Patreon and those who become channel members here. I'm Cristian Presura, Fisica Povestita. You're cool and I wish you the best. See you next time.